What if Will Smith had played Django instead of Jamie Foxx? Believe it or not, he almost did. Not only that, but Christopher Waltz initially turned the role down, Leonardo DiCaprio struggled to even say his character's racist dialogue, and Samuel L. Jackson's part was originally written to be far more sadistic than what made it into the film. Kevin Costner and Kurt Russell were both attached as villains who never appeared in the film, while Jonah Hill and Sacha Baron Cohen were almost in an entire subplot that ended up being cut. And even the ending of the movie was rewritten on the fly while filming. So how did Tarantino take this chaotic mix of rewrites, recastings, and abandoned storylines and turn it into one of the most daring and successful films? To find out, let's dive in and take a look at what could have been Django Unchained. Tarantino had been toying with the idea of tackling America's history of slavery long before Django Unchained ever took shape. As early as 2007, he spoke openly about wanting to create what he called a Southern, a spaghetti western transplanted into the brutal realities of America's pre-Civil War Deep South. His goal wasn't to make a heavy-handed issue movie, but to confront the horrors of slavery with the raw pulp energy of the genre. In explaining the inspiration for his vision, he pointed to the miniseries roots, recalling how after 16 hours of build-up, when Chicken George is given the chance to whip the sadistic slave owner, played by Lloyd Bridges, he refuses, implying that doing so would make him just as bad as his oppressor. However, the way Tarantino saw it in living rooms across America, 100 million people shouted, "Whip his ass." That gap between restraint on screen and the audience's thirst for justice stuck with him, as Tarantino wanted to make a film where the enslaved didn't turn the other cheek, but took revenge, delivering the kind of cathartic bloodshed that mainstream depictions of slavery had rarely allowed. At the same time, Tarantino's treatment of race has always been complicated. His films often feature black characters and black culture, but he's also been criticized for his character's liberal use of the N-word. Defenders argued the language reflected the realities of the worlds he was depicting, and none defended him more fiercely than Samuel L. Jackson, who maintained that Tarantino wasn't racist at all, and that in nearly every Tarantino film he was in, the characters he played were often the smartest in the script. However, director Spike Lee took issue with the fact that American slavery was not a Sergio Leone spaghetti western, saying instead it was a Holocaust. As a kid, Tarantino was taken to theaters in downtown LA's Broadway district, where he saw blaxploitation films at second-run houses, which he referred to as the Black Hollywood. He loved the experience, the energy of the crowds who talked back to the screen, the infectious soundtracks, and the sheer sense of fun. Those nights left a lasting impression, showing him how powerful and alive cinema could feel when audiences were fully engaged. But he also lamented that the music wasn't utilized better with the visuals, something he would strive to do better with his films, like using Stuck in the Middle with You during the infamous ear-cutting scene in Reservoir Dogs. While promoting Inglourious Basterds in Japan, Tarantino heard whispers of a Tokyo record shop that carried rare spaghetti western soundtracks unavailable in the US. He tracked it down, walked out with bags stuffed full of records and CDs, and headed back to his hotel room. Hours later, after immersing himself in Ennio Morricone, inspiration struck. Grabbing the hotel stationery, he began writing the opening scene of Django Unchained. When he finished, he leaned back, smiled, and thought, well, I guess this is my next movie. The film's title draws inspiration from Sergio Corbucci's 1966 spaghetti western Django, whose star Franco Nero even makes a cameo in Tarantino's version, and from Hercules Unchained. Tarantino even nods to this influence in the script when Schultz tells Calvin Candy he wants to build a fighter he's trying to purchase as the Black Hercules. To play Django, Tarantino initially pursued Will Smith, known for his exhaustive story sessions where he breaks down scripts with writers and directors in search of improvements. Smith struggled with the fact that Django was not written as the central figure of the story. He reportedly wanted the role reshaped so that he would be the clear lead, rather than sharing the spotlight with Christopher Waltz's Dr. King Schultz. Not only that, but he wanted Django to be the one to kill Calvin Candy, and wanted the film to be the greatest love story that African Americans had ever seen in American cinema. He didn't want it to be a vengeance story, he wanted it to be a love story, as he didn't believe violence was the reaction to violence. Though Smith praised the screenplay as one of the best he's ever read, he ultimately passed, saying the fit wasn't quite right and he didn't want to delay production. Smith would go on to headline his own slavery epic years later, Emancipation, shot by the same cinematographer as Django Unchained, Robert Richardson. And while Smith has a reputation for reshaping projects to his liking, such an approach was never going to work with Tarantino, as the director has famously said of actors, "I'm paying you to say my dialogue. Make no mistake." Another actor on the film who played one of the villains approached Tarantino during filming with a written idea for how his relationship with Broomhilda could end. In his version, the character saves the day by handing her her freedom papers and never laying a hand on her. The next day, eager for feedback, he asked Tarantino what he thought. Tarantino burst out laughing and told him essentially that he had rewritten the script so his own character became the hero. when in fact he was supposed to be one of the villains. After Will Smith stepped away, Jamie Foxx swooped in and immediately impressed Tarantino. He told the director that he fully understood the script, that he didn't need it explained to him, and then recited a key speech from memory word for word, which left Tarantino stunned. Foxx even mentioned that he owned his own horse and already knew how to ride, later riding his own horse in the film. But once rehearsals began, Tarantino began to panic. Foxx delivered Django's lines with a polished, confident coolness that clashed with the director's vision. Pulling him aside, Tarantino laid it out bluntly, saying, "I knew I was going to have this problem with you. Listen, you're a slave. He's not cool, he's a slave. He doesn't even know how to read. You come in with your Louis Vuitton bag and your Range Rover. You're not Jim Brown. He's a slave." And then he becomes the hero. When Tarantino first handed Samuel L. Jackson the script, Jackson's reaction was blunt. "You want me to be the most despicable Negro in the history of cinema?" And while Jackson was game, Tarantino later had second thoughts and scaled back Stephen's brutality in the film. One deleted moment after his character showed Django to his quarters, Stephen would have said, "We're going to burn all the stuff inside the room afterwards," prompting Django to slap him and threaten to strip him down and whip him in front of the entire plantation, setting up their feud. Later, in the torture sequence, Jackson was originally meant to deliver a long monologue, boasting that in all his years on the plantation, no one had ever dared to lay a hand on him until Django, before sadistically burning Django's nipples with a hot poker. Tarantino ultimately cut these scenes, worried they would make audiences turn on Jackson himself, which Tarantino didn't want to be responsible for. However, one thing Jackson added to the film that made the cut was created during rehearsals, when Jackson began mimicking DiCaprio's character as a joke. Tarantino loved it so much that he decided to incorporate it into the film. DiCaprio would be cast as the villainous Calvin Candy, but on his first day, he struggled with the role, particularly with saying the N-word. He repeatedly stopped takes, telling Jamie Foxx, "I can't do this, it's tough for me to say." However, Foxx reminded him that during slavery, their characters would never have been friends, or even speak to each other, and that Leo couldn't fully embody the role without facing that reality. The very next day, when Foxx greeted him on the set, Leo stayed fully in character and ignored him. As for the famous scene where Leo slams his hand on the table and crushes the glass, the blood was completely unplanned. He accidentally cut his hand but kept going, staying in character and finishing the take to everyone's shock. Afterward, though, the cast and Tarantino debated whether to keep the real blood. Ultimately, Tarantino was unsure and decided to film the rest of the scene both ways, with and without blood. Although contrary to popular belief, the blood Leo smears across Kerry Washington's face was fake. When Christoph Waltz was first offered the role, he actually turned it down. He felt the part was written too much to his persona, and he was wary of being typecast as a villain after Inglourious Basterds. Tarantino, however, refused to take no for an answer. Waltz finally agreed, but only on one condition. The character had to remain entirely pure, never once acting in a cruel or villainous way. Tarantino responded with a handwritten note that read, "Of course, mein Herr." Kevin Costner was originally cast as a character named Ace Woody, a brutal Mandingo trainer and Calvin Candy's right-hand man. However, when Costner dropped out due to scheduling conflicts, the role went to Kurt Russell, but he too would also have to leave the project, leaving Tarantino choosing not to recast the part. Instead, the character of Ace Woody was folded into Walton Goggins' character, Billy Crash, and Crash was originally written as an even more despicable character than what appears in the final film. Originally, before Django's return at the end, there was a planned scene where Crash sexually assaults Broomhilda in his cabin. Kerry Washington expressed her deep concerns about filming it to co-star Jamie Foxx, who then spoke directly with Tarantino. After hearing their perspective, on the day of the shoot, Tarantino addressed the cast and crew and told them to wrap for the day, as he would cut out the scene from the film entirely. The original ending to the film would have seen the family unit of the late Calvin Candy return to the big house from the funeral, only for it to explode right before they enter, knocking them on their collective butts. Out of the smoke would have emerged Django, who would have let them get to their feet before having a standoff with them and shooting them all. However, on the day they were to shoot the ending, Tarantino, unsatisfied with the ending he wrote, asked everyone to give him a minute while he retreated to his trailer to rewrite it, emerging a few moments later with a completely different ending, which moved the action to inside the house before blowing it up after. Jonah Hill was originally cast as a character named Scotty Harmony, whose father purchases Broomhilda at auction for him. Scotty eventually falls in love with her, but is later duped and killed by Calvin Candy during a rigged card game, losing her to him in the process. Hill eventually had to leave the project due to scheduling conflicts with the Watch. Still eager to include him, Tarantino later brought Hill back in a smaller but memorable role as one of the bumbling Klansmen. The part of Scotty Harmony was then given to Sacha Baron Cohen, but he too had to withdraw in order to appear in Les Mis. At that point, Tarantino decided the subplot was making the film too unwieldy, and he cut both the character and storyline entirely, not wanting to have to split the movie into two separate films like Kill Bill due to having too much story. In the end, Django Unchained proved to be a massive success. earning Tarantino the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay, and Christopher Waltz his second Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. Yet, in a surprise to many, both Leonardo DiCaprio and Samuel L. Jackson, who delivered some of the most unforgettable performances of their careers, weren't even nominated. And it's hard not to wonder how different the film might have been had Will Smith taken the role of Django and reshaped it into the sweeping love story he envisioned. Would the movie have resonated the same way, or lost the raw, pulpy edge that made it distinctly Tarantino? Either way, Django got his revenge, and Tarantino got his, winning the Oscar that eluded him for Inglourious Basterds. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more of Hollywood's untold stories and unmade movies.